Hebrews 11. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see.
Now, Hebrews 11 is the Heroes of Faith chapter. And I think there's a common misunderstanding of what faith is. Faith is often viewed as a belief in something. And I really don't think it's that at all. I mean, that's part of it. But verse 1 says faith is confidence and assurance. It's not just belief that Jesus is the Son of God, because even the demons believe and shudder. Faith is how do you live your life in response to how confident you are that Jesus is Lord, that Jesus is sovereign, that He hears your prayers, that He loves you, that He takes care of you, and that He will save you. How confident are you of that? Because it changes how you live your life. It changes how you set your priorities in life. What's important to you? What do you strive for? Do you look at physical, earthly things, or do you look at spiritual, heavenly things? How do you prioritize your life?
This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible.
So in creation itself, whoever the writer of Hebrews is, says, we understand that the universe was formed by God's command, and it was made out of things that we can't see or understand. So, do you believe that God has the power to create the earth and the universe and all things in it simply by the power of His Word? Is that unbelievable? It's not just about belief. It's about who do you believe God is? Does God have power? Is God sovereign? Is He in control of the universe?
By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings.
Now, I would entertain ideas and thoughts on why Abel's sacrifice was better than Cain's, because I think Abel's was one of livestock and Cain's was one of the field. And I used to think that because God wanted animal sacrifices and not grain offerings, but I don't think that's the case, because even in the Jewish law, there were grain offerings and animal offerings. So both kinds of offerings are acceptable. What's really the issue, I think, is faith. When Abel offered his sacrifice, he gave a significant sacrifice of what he did, and he trusted that God would take care of him, even though he gave a significant sacrifice. It's possible that Cain gave something that wasn't even a sacrifice at all. He just gave a small portion of his proceeds, and he didn't trust that God would take care of him if he gave too much. Now, I don't think there's anywhere in the Bible that says that. That's just my assumptions.
And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God.
So I've always been a big fan of Enoch. Enoch is the only one in the entire Bible that is said to have been taken because God pleased him, or because God was pleased with him. That he found favor in God's eyes, and God took him away before he died. That he didn't taste death, but God just took him. I have always wished I was Enoch. I wish God would take me without death because I pleased Him. I certainly don't think I live up to that standard. But Enoch is certainly one to admire. So whatever Enoch did in his life, it was full of faith and trust an absolute confidence and assurance that God existed and that He interacted with His children on His creation, that He loved His children, and that He would take care of us. If you absolutely believe that, you can follow the path of Enoch.
And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him.
All right, so you can't please God without faith. And faith is not only belief, because it says anyone who comes to Him must believe that He exists, and part 2, that He rewards those who seek Him. So this is a further definition. It's confidence and assurance. It's belief that He exists, and it's belief that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him.
By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith.
So Noah was told that the whole earth was going to be flooded. And I don't think it had even rained on the earth at that time. But Noah believed God, and he believed that God existed, and he believed that God would keep His word. Even though he did not understand what would happen or how it would happen, he trusted His word, even though he couldn't see or couldn't know what was about to happen. And we need to apply that in our lives today, from day to day. If you run out of money, you live paycheck to paycheck, or you have sickness in your family, don't dwell in fear and anxiety as if there is no God who can save you or protect you or provide for you. Don't live as if there is no afterlife. If someone is sick on this earth, and even if they have a terminal illness, don't fret and worry as if things will be worse if they die. You have to believe that God is good, that He loves His children, He takes care of His children, and that He has a reward for those who seek Him.
By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going.
And that's the key. Faith is the substance of things not seen. The confidence of what we hope for, and the assurance of what we do not see. We walk by faith and not by sight. Don't walk according to what you see. You say, well, I don't want to go there because I don't know what will happen. Abraham went, and he didn't know where he was going. That's faith. Trusting in God. Not just belief, but trust.
By faith, he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise.
Now, I often think that it was maybe wrong of Sarah to laugh when God said she was going to have a child and she was 90 years old. Because I thought that was a lack of faith. But that might not be the case. I mean, here it says, by faith Sarah, when she was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who made the promise. So the Bible says that Sarah trusted that God would give her a son because he promised to do so. So she had faith. She trusted in him and his power and his ability to keep his promises.
And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore.
So this one man, Abraham, was 100 years old. He was as good as dead. But he had children as numerous as the stars in the sky and countless as sand on the seashore. That's the Jewish nation. But not all descendants of Abraham. Actually, so it's not just the Jewish nation. It's also Muslims. Because from Abraham, the promise came through Isaac, but Abraham also had Ishmael. Abraham was the father of Ishmael, who is the father of the Muslims, as I understand it. So if you just say how many children did Abraham have, well, you would include Ishmael and all his descendants, as well as Isaac and all his descendants. And that would be a lot. Essentially, you could say all Jews and Muslims and I guess there are a lot of Jews and Muslims that aren't Jews and Muslims by genealogy, some by converts or something like that, but it's certainly a lot of people.
All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth.
And so this is a key part that I think people cannot, almost refuse to believe today. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were all given the promise, and they all believed in the promise, but none of them saw the realization of it in their lifetime. Moses saw the promised land, but he did not enter the promised land. So he had to die in faith, trusting that God would carry his people into the promised land and establish that land for his people, because he didn't see it before he died. And people, especially Americans, it's the kind of the American culture of, ultimate satisfaction right now, have the idea, that's kind of the American dream. The American dream is to have nothing to start with, and then to be rich and powerful by the time you die. That's the American dream. Anytime you see anybody talk about they fulfilled the American dream, it's because they have accomplished great things, usually along the lines of money and power. And I think that's bad, that's the American dream. And it trains people, that you're only successful if you accomplish everything you ever hoped for in your lifetime. But faith, all these heroes of faith died in faith, not seeing the promises completely fulfilled in their lifetime, but still trusting that God would do what he said he would do.
People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them.
Now let me tell you, I am looking for that eternal heavenly country. I'm not holding on to America or this earth or even my family. I want to take my family with me to the heavenly country, but I'm not holding on, and I don't set my goals on things of this life and this earth. I want to trust God to provide for me in this life. I want to trust him in every way in this life, and not expect him to do anything that I want him to do, but I want to live out his will for me in this life. And I want that eternal heavenly reward after I die. That's my goal.
By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death.
So that's faith. Abraham absolutely trusted God in every way. Now, I don't know how God appeared to Abraham, if he appeared in dreams or in a vision, or if with this powerful booming voice that was obviously God, or if it was more subtle. Because I think it would make a difference if you saw this vision kind of like Paul did, where other people witnessed it and they were amazed, and you knew something happened, that you weren't just going crazy, but something miraculous happened and other people could testify to it. Then you're like, that's absolutely the word of God and I believe it. But if it's more subtle, if it comes in dreams in the night, and you can't distinguish that dream from another dream, which usually the dreams, like the ones Nebuchadnezzar had, they weighed on their minds heavily, and they weren't just like a normal dream. They were very different. But whatever way God spoke to Abraham, Abraham heard it, and he believed it, and did not waver. That is faith. When you don't waver, when you trust it among all things that happen. And, some people say that the Old Testament doesn't talk about resurrection from the dead, but here we know that Abraham even believed that God would raise Isaac from the dead after he killed him with the knife. So Abraham was absolutely committed to killing Isaac because he trusted God and he wanted to see what God was going to do to either bring Isaac back to life or something.
By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff.
Now, this is something I've wondered about too. When Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future, he says he gives the blessings to Jacob, and he gives not as good blessings to Esau, maybe some curses or something. He said, well, did Isaac really have the power to determine their future? Did God speak to Isaac and tell him what their future was going to be? Or did Isaac just say, this is what I want your future to be, and then God held him to that? I don't know. I really don't think that I can bless my children in the same way that Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. It's possible I do have that ability, and I just don't have enough faith to carry it out. But this says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. So maybe he said, this is what I think your future is going to be, because God has put that on my mind, and I believe what God puts on my mind is absolute truth, and this is the way I see it, and then I believe wholeheartedly that God will carry out the way he has envisioned it in my mind. I don't know. I would like to hear your thoughts on that. So Jacob blessing the 12 sons is the exact same issue.
By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born.
So Joseph didn't see the exodus, but when he was near death, he spoke about the exodus, and he told him where he wanted his bones to be buried. He died in faith, trusting what would happen in the future.
Born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict.
I hadn't noticed that. They saw he was no ordinary child. So now we're talking about Moses. They hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child. I always thought they just hid him because they didn't want their baby to die. But this throws another little issue in there. They saw he was no ordinary child.
By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin.
Now, that would be a hard decision. When you are a royalty, when you are a king, when you've got everything you can imagine, you've got all the wealth and power that you can imagine, Moses turned it down because he chose to be who he was instead of who he had grown up thinking that he was.
He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt.
Now look at that. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ. He didn't know Jesus Christ. He knew God. He knew the Hebrew God. But he grew up being an Egyptian, knowing Egyptian gods, not even having any concept of the Hebrew God. But it says he regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ greater value than the treasures of Egypt. He came to realize who he was, and he valued that over all the wealth and royalty and power he had in Egypt.
Because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith.
That would tell you that wealth and power on earth is not as valuable as the reward that God has for us in heaven. All the wealth and power in the world is not as good as the eternal reward that God has for us in heaven. Because Moses turned down all the wealth and power of the world in order for the eternal reward. So that's another concept. I think if you ask Jews their concept of afterlife, a lot of them don't even have a concept of afterlife. So what reward would Moses have been looking for if there was no afterlife?
Faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel.
So he persevered because he saw him who is invisible. He saw God, who is invisible. I don't even know what to say about that.
By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell, after the army had marched around them for 7 days.
So, do you think the Jews that marched around Jericho believed that God was going to give them the victory? I think so. Is it possible that anybody had any doubts? I think so. I think that's possible too. But for the sake of those who believed, for the sake of those who had faith, God faithfully brought down the walls of Jericho. It could be an example of if there were people who didn't have faith, but they were just marching because they had no choice. For them, God was giving them an opportunity to see that He is faithful and He can do great things, great and impossible things. But for those who believed, He was demonstrating to them that He can do all things and that they are justified in believing that God can do anything and that God will always keep His promises.
By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again.
There's more evidence of Old Testament resurrection.
There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection.
Another resurrection in the Old Testament. There were plenty of reasons to believe in resurrection, life after death, even in the Old Covenant.
Some faced jeers and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheep skins and goat skins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them.
So, pointing out these heroes of faith, he's pointing out all the hardships that they endured, all the persecutions, the killings, the torture that they endured. That should give us hope when things are not going exactly the way we would prefer them to go in our lives. That's when faith shows up. That's when faith has an opportunity to demonstrate to other people and to God that you actually have faith. If everything goes well, you have no opportunity to demonstrate to other people that you trust God. It's only when things go bad. And all of these people that are heroes of faith, they died in faith, still hoping and trusting that God was going to do what he said. They didn't see it happen in their lifetime. Some maybe saw parts of it, but in the end, all people hope for life after death and resurrection, reward with God in heaven. And nobody sees that before they die. It's the issue of, where do you set your priorities? Are your goals simply revolving around wealth and power on earth? Getting everything you want in earth? Then you're not hoping for an eternal heavenly reward at all. You're just hoping for wealth and power on earth. Don't expect wealth and power on earth. Expect hardship and persevere with faith through the hard times, and let God reward you how he chooses to reward you. And I'm certain that you will be grateful in the end that you did.
They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect.
And I think that's talking about the sacrifice of Jesus. They were all hoping for a Messiah, someone to come and justify and atone for sins. And a lot of Jews had the mindset that it was only a physical kingdom of domination on earth, but that was a misguided faith, and it still is today. But it says none of them received what had been promised. So, what you say, if you only will have faith in God, if he will do whatever you want him to do on your time frame, then you don't have faith at all. You have to trust in what is not seen. Faith is the substance of things not seen. It's the assurance of things not seen. And it is the design of God not to give you what you hope for in this life, because this is the opportunity to develop your faith, to trust in him for things that you can't see or understand. You don't know what's in heaven. And a lot of people try to paint the picture of heaven. They go to Revelation and say, this is what it's going to be like, gold streets and a tree on this side and that side of the river. And there's going to be either a square city or a cube city or a pyramid city with certain lengths and width and height. That's not the physical depiction of heaven. That is apocalyptic language. Metaphors and things like that. So don't expect to get everything you want in this life. You have to learn how to trust in what you can't see. Trust God in what you can't see. Expect hardship and persecution. And don't be upset or anxious because things are hard. It's supposed to be hard. It says that a lot of these people lived in deserts and mountains, in caves and holes in the ground. Do you live in a hole in the ground? If you lived in a hole in the ground, would you want to have a better life? Would you pray for a better life? Would you be upset if God didn't give you a better life? Look at how many people over the years who've died young for different reasons, whether they were in wars and military or whether they were killed because of their faith. And they had very short lives on earth. Do you feel sorry for them? I don't. I believe they carried out their will for God, or they carried out God's will for them in the life that they had. Because I believe God is sovereign over all. And if somebody has a long life, then God gave them a long life. If someone has a short life, then God gave them a short life. But I believe the ultimate reward is after you die. Okay, so we've hit 30 minutes. It's gone long enough. Hebrews 11, Heroes of Faith.